Hello, everyone. I hope you are doing well. I'm coming to you today from my parents' house. As you can see, a different background here. First of all, I should apologize. As you might have noticed, for the Journal 8, where I was asking for questions about the argument essay, I made a mistake, and I put narrative essay instead of argument essay. So some of you, still put what you were having difficulty with the narrative essay, which was obviously 2 weeks ago. So that's my bad. Uh, and I would also say if you have any questions about the argument essay that you didn't get to submit because of that, please email them to me as soon as possible, and I'll try to give you a thorough response. Okay, so let's get into it. I do have some questions that people submitted that I want to answer. So let's move right on to the first one here. The first question here says, the question I have for the argument essay is, do I have to use a certain amount of sources? Good question, important question. As it says on the assignment sheet for the argument essay, I am requiring 3 sources for this. 3 sources. One of those sources I'm asking to be from either the databases that I gave you a link to and I talked about in my video about doing research. So one source needs to be either from the databases or something from the UCC library. The other sources can just be websites or newspapers, magazines, anything credible that you find on the internet, anything like that. So just make sure you do have that one source from databases. Like I told you before, the databases I would use there, JSTOR, EBSCO, Project Muse, those 3 in particular. I would start with those, look for a source through that. You might have to be kind of general when you're looking it up. You might have to use like more expansive kind of phrases to increase the results that you're going to get. And remember that when you're to use a source, all you need is one quote from it. You just need one statistic, one quote, and that counts as using the source. So it doesn't have to be, like the golden perfect article that's everything you were ever looking for. Just anything that helps you to advance the argument you're trying to make. All right, moving right along here. The second question I have says, one thing I have been confused about is how to properly use quotation marks and punctuation when using a quote. Also, right after the quote, I'm not sure how to properly give credit when it comes from an electronic source or a source that gives no information on authors. I have had to use this in my other courses and I've found different styles online, just wondering which way is the best to do it. Okay, so first of all, the punctuation for quotes. Um, if you lead into the quote by using a word like says or writes or states or whatever, you give us a comma after that word. So you'll have, the author writes, comma, start quotation marks, give us the quote, end quotation marks. Um, the citation. I posted a sample MLA paper that it's just an entire paper about whatever it's about, doesn't matter what it's about. But the whole paper is formatted in MLA format. In the way that you should be doing. So if you take a look at that MLA sample paper, you can see examples of this. You can see them using quotes and punctuating all like that. After the quote, you have your in-text citation. This, if you'll remember, is the parentheses. You give us the author's last name, the page number, close the parentheses, period. Um, so this question had asked about if we don't have the author or if it's an electronic source. So if you have no page number, but you have an author, you give us parentheses, still author's last name, and now instead of the page number, you give us the title of the article in quotation marks. So it would be whatever the name is, and then just the title right there. Oh yes, I actually have a picture of an in-text citation that I just want to put up now. And if you're looking at this, you can see how after the quote right there, you have the parentheses, last name, page number, just like I was saying. So just to show you that example for a second. Yeah, but like I was saying, with if you have no page numbers, you go with the title and quotation marks. If you have no author, you just leave that out. So say you had a source that was online and it just didn't have an author, right? But it's still credible because it's from like a website that you trust. In that case, you would give us the quote, and then you would just go parentheses, the title of the article in quotation marks, and then close parentheses. That's if there isn't an author to be found. Otherwise, you would still have the author there, even if there's no page number. So yeah, I think that's what I would say about punctuating like that. Oh, one other thing, if you have like a really long quote and like the beginning of it's really good and like the middle of it is whatever and then the ending is like really good, one trick to do with quotes to make them a little bit shorter and a little more to the point, because if your quote is too long, It can end up getting confusing to the reader because they're just going to spend so much time reading to the reading what the author that you're quoting from is saying. They might forget the point that you were trying to make. So I would encourage you to stay on the shorter side, and by that I mean not more than maybe like 3 or 4 lines or something. So yeah, what you can do in this situation, if there's some stuff in the middle that you don't really need, you can give us the first part of the quote, and then you do an ellipses, which is those 3 dots next to each other, 3 periods right next to each other. So you start with the quote, you give us the 3 dots, and then you can skip to the ending of the quote if that's the other good part that you want to give there. So this way you don't have to give the whole thing, or you can just make sure you can really try to focus the audience's attention on what's really important. That's why that's a good thing to do. So another grammar thing with quotes there. Okay, moving right along here to our third question. It says here, for my argument essay, I have chosen topic 3 that will discuss police brutality. One thing that is affecting my writing of this essay is I'm afraid of getting too personal or offending anyone. Of course, I'm going to use proper judgment, but it's such a sensitive topic, especially right now. I just want to know if you have any advice for me. That's a great question. That's a really good question, and one that I'm really glad that this person asked. So, first of all, in terms of your own experience can be a valuable thing to include in an essay. I think this goes back to high school and maybe some college classes, some professors, but I think it's mostly kind of a high school approach where they tell you like you're never supposed to use I, right? You're not supposed to acknowledge like yourself at all. You're supposed to be like kind of the objective writer going about things totally neutrally. I think this was always kind of a fantasy, like I don't think it's really possible to write like to not write from your own perspective. I don't think it's really possible, honestly. Um, and you can use I. Academics use I. People who write books, they use the word I in them. So I don't know where that rule came from or why they teach it, but it just is not true. It's not the case. You can absolutely use I. Um, so in terms of why we would include personal experience, if you go back to the video from last week about argument strategies, one of them that I mentioned was an anecdote. An anecdote is a personal experience, just like you're saying, that helps you prove your argument. That works as its personal example, basically, right? And this is effective in certain ways, and but it shouldn't be our only piece of evidence, right? It is effective because just like with our narrative essay, when we talked about the idea of a narrative being relatable and being more engaging to the reader and more interesting, and it helps them, really picture it or put themselves into it. Using an anecdote in an argumentative essay can do very much the same thing. It can help the reader to connect to it. It appeals to their emotions, right? Because whatever issue you're talking about, it makes it more more real life. It makes it more of a real world thing, something that the audience can sympathize with and connect to. So I would say that personal stories, personal experiences, can definitely help your essay be more convincing. And when we're writing an argument essay, ultimately what we're trying to do is convince. So I think it's a good tool. Absolutely, go for it, use it. Like I was saying, you wouldn't want an anecdote to be your only evidence, and I know probably none of us were going to do that, but you just want to make sure that, well, because, it's just one person's experience at the end of the day, right? So somebody else can say, well, I had a different experience. That doesn't mean that it's not good and that we shouldn't include it. That just means that we also need data. We also need statistics. We also need, historical examples or credible sources and stuff like that. That was one point I was trying to make in that video about argumentative strategies. Is that really what you need to be using multiple argument strategies. So an anecdote is a very important one. It shouldn't be the only one you use, but it is definitely something that can help your paper and make it more relatable for the reader. In terms of offending people, don't worry about it. I literally would worry about it zero. Definitely don't worry about offending me. I've tried throughout the course to make it clear when I'm giving something that's just my own opinion or when I'm talking about something that I, don't consider myself an expert in. Which includes these topics. I don't pretend to be an expert on police brutality or coronavirus. Maybe the college one, maybe a little bit. I do have a lot of experience there. But these other topics, I don't pretend to be an expert on that subject matter. I do think that I know some writers who are experts, and I try to point towards them. Like the essays that I gave us on these things are writers who I consider to be experts, so I will I kind of default to them in the specifics of the arguments. What I'm ultimately interested in, is teaching you how to write the essay, how to write the most convincing essay you can, stuff like that. But anyway, sorry, I don't know how I got there. But in terms of offending people, don't worry about it. Um, it's not something I want you to really even be thinking about at all. Academics, like, if an academic never offended anybody, we would never make any progress, really, in anything. The job of an academic is to be provocative, is to tell people hard truths, right? If we were really worried about offending people, like just for instance, some of the data that's given in that end of policing book from the first chapter, where the author talks about things like that. The statistics show that body cams aren't actually that effective, right? If you were worried about like offending anybody who like whatever, like, oh well, some people's family members are cops, some people are cops themselves. If you weren't going to say that research about body cams because you're worrying about offending people, that would be a great injustice, right? So ultimately, academics historically have been the ones who need to, try to put the hard truths out there, whether or not people like it or whether or not they're willing to hear it. I also think that there's kind of a high school mentality where, or again, maybe in some colleges, but specifically in high school, where they don't want anyone to talk about anything political, right? They don't want there to be any arguments or disagreements, really, unless it's like an approved debate that the teacher has decided the terms of in advance. That's not what college is. That's not what college is about at all. College is about everyone having their opinion and being well researched in why they believe those things, right? So in college, like one of the main things it's about is for you as students to kind of explore different things and make your own informed opinions, right? So I feel free to give my opinion as long as I say it's my opinion, right? I never want students to think that I'm telling them what to think or whatever, so I say, hey, just my opinion. You can disagree if you want. I'm not saying this is the truth, but here it is. Academics is about debate. That's what it's about. And if we limit ourselves to only the debates where no one's offended, there are very few of those, and they're not very important. So when you're in the process of becoming an expert in a topic, which is what college makes you, you should feel free to give your own opinion. So don't worry about offending other people. As long as you have your facts to back up your argument, it doesn't matter if they're offended. It doesn't matter if they want to hear it or not. If you've done the research, then you have a well-informed opinion, and that deserves to be heard regardless of how anyone else thinks about it. So don't feel that way. I'm very glad you asked the question, though, because I think it is a big distinction between high school and college. So yeah, put your opinions out there, argue for them, make the case. If other people don't like it, too bad for them. That's how it is. All right, let's keep moving. Question number 4 reads, something I am having trouble with is expanding my argument. I do not know whether I should add more data or leave it as is. I'm afraid to add more data and lose the flow of my essay. So in terms of expanding arguments, I think I said this before, but I think outlines are a really helpful way to try to expand our arguments in terms of like, fleshing it out or making it longer, stuff like that. Because like I've said, making an outline forces you to know what your paragraphs will be out in advance. So then, it makes you save some of the points that you're going to make for later because you know it's going to show up in a different paragraph. And then you have to really expand on your current paragraph to make it long enough. In terms of deciding whether or not to add more data, I don't have like a very straightforward answer, but I guess I would say that you want to use the data that's most convincing, right? Your goal is to convince the reader. If you think that adding more data is going to make it convincing, then go for it. But if you're showing like multiple pieces of data that make a similar point or make the same point, maybe you don't need both of them. Like if another piece of data is just gonna like add on and not necessarily like make the reader any more convinced, like if it's just duplicating what something another source has said, then maybe you don't need it. But ultimately, the only thing I can say about this is you want to look at it from the reader's point of view. Do you think that the amount of like convincing that the piece of data will do is worth it to break up the flow of the essay a little bit? It depends. It depends how important the data is, how central it is to your argument, and whether or not you think it could be the thing that's going to like now convince the audience. So I would really just think of it from the reader's point of view. Do you think that the data is gonna like make them more likely to agree with you, or do you think it's gonna like obscure things, it's like you said, mess up the flow or something like that? And I don't know, maybe there's some kind of medium, like middle there, where you can like give the data, but maybe try to like shorten it or the quote or something, or try to frame it in a way that doesn't break up the flow or something. I don't know. That's hard to do. But the most important thing I would say for this question is just look at it from the reader's point of view and try to think about how it's going to affect them. And I think that will lead you to the right decision. finally, we move on to our last question. My question is, how do I become better with using more complex vocabulary and better my grammar? Okay, that's a good question. So, like I said before, my first instinct in responding to this is that I think vocabulary and grammar are seriously overrated when it comes to the list of things that make you a good writer. So, number one, I wouldn't worry about grammar and vocabulary until you feel really confident about things like a thesis, evidence, organization, things like that. Intro, conclusion, those things. So I would really first focus on those more, what I would say, bigger picture concerns before I started worrying about grammar and vocabulary. If you feel like you want to become a better writer, you want to be able to do better in your classes, focus on those big picture things first, and then later on you can move to the grammar. Okay, with that being said, the best way to improve your vocabulary and to get better at grammar is to read a lot. I know that's not like a very helpful for many of you. Many of you are probably saying, well, I don't really want to read all that much. And I should say not reading, just social media, right? Like so much of our reading these days is just reading like posts on social media and stuff, right? Those aren't going to help you with grammar, and probably not with vocabulary either. If you want to improve those things, read books. Read the newspaper, read journalists, read articles, read novels. That is the best way because you'll find new words, and you also have to like figure out what those words mean, look them up, and stuff like that. But I think that that's better than like doing flashcards or a quiz or something like that. So I would say just however much you read, read twice as much, and that's maybe the best way to improve your grammar and stuff. Because then you just see the grammar being used correctly, and it becomes more second nature. Um, so I would just read really as much as you can. I also am going to give you some advice on specific grammar things that's coming this week. So definitely check out that, and I'll have more for you there. Okay, I think that's all the questions that I have for today. Like I said, I apologize for my mistake in that journal. And if I didn't answer your question, please email me as soon as possible, and I will be happy to do so. All right, talk to you soon. Take care.